Well, welcome to another week's analysis behind the news. Now, most of you know that I usually just get some newspapers and come down and sit in front of the camera and pontificate on something. But this time I'm going to do a little bit different, mainly because somebody wrote me and asked me to answer a question they had in their mind. They understood the things that I was saying, but how did we get involved in the Middle East? What got us embroiled in all of this mess and chaos? And so I'm going to literally read something that I just typed out real quick to kind of give a background of how we got embroiled in this mess to begin with. Now, it is not completely comprehensive. There are nuances involved and so on and so forth, but in general, this is it. The history of our involvement in in North Africa and what we call the Middle East it was originally linked to the foreign policy of the designs of Britain. Now, even the designation for the area, the Middle East, is English. It's not American. Middle East is halfway between England and Asia. That's why it's called the Middle East. And so they involved us in that definition, that semantical term that they used, not what we originally used. Historically, and this is going to be a surprise to some of you, but historically, England was our enemy until we declared war on Germany in World War I. Now, I could go down through a litany of reasons why that was the case. Some of them you would recognize, and some of them you either wouldn't recognize or wouldn't have thought of, such as the War of Independence, the War of 1812, the Oregon disputes, the disputes in the Caribbean, and the seizing of American vessels clear up to the Buchanan administration, and on and on and on and on. But they were our enemy until World War I. Now, the thing is that Germany had basically won the war, and they had knocked Russia out of the war. And if it had not been for us declaring war against Germany, France and England would have had to have sued for peace. Now, that's not what they tell you in a lot of these, short programs on television and that sort of thing. But that was the case. England and France were on their knees. They needed help, and we came in and helped them. Now, as I said, Germany knocked Russia out of the war, and Russia turned socialist and then communist because of the help of the German government and individuals from America and England. Now, once we got in bed with Britain, instead of minding our own business during World War I, we adopted the British position relative to all the Islamic countries except those ruled by Russia. By and large, British foreign policy became our foreign policy, in the Middle East, with some exceptions, but they were exceptions. The network of Royal Institute of International Affairs, the Royal Institute of International Affairs, you should look that up, commonly called Chatham House, Chatham House, Chatham House, you can look that one up online, helped influence European governments, and especially the United States through an American affiliate called the Council on Foreign Relations. This network, including the CFR, has always worked to bring about a one world government they refer to as the New World Order. Now, the CFR increasingly influenced our federal government, and CFR members rose to lead key aspects of our own government, especially state and defense departments. In fact, under some presidents, every national department was headed up by a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Perhaps the most notorious CFR member in my lifetime, who was the head of the State Department, was John Foster Dulles, one of the founders of the Council on Foreign Relations. Now, Dulles was active in Christian socialism, and he was active in those circles, and he was an open advocate of using treaties to alter the Constitution of the United States. His notorious address to a regional meeting of the American Bar Association in Kentucky in 1952 openly stated that he believed that treaties supersede the Constitution, including the Bill of Rights. that treaties could supersede our own Bill of Rights. Just after this speech, Dwight David Eisenhower appointed Dulles Secretary of State, where he did all he could to subordinate the United States to these treaties and to the United Nations. And he used, as I said, treaties as part of the process of also subordinating ourselves, solidifying our position in the United Nations. And this is just one example of why the founder of the John Birch Society, Robert Welch, criticized Eisenhower. And that caused a big smear against the John Birch Society for what he said. But it was only one of the reasons that he said it. And if you look at all the organizations that Eisenhower belonged to, you will immediately understand why he would have appointed a Dulles to be the head of the State Department, because Eisenhower was a strong advocate of the United Nations. He belonged to universal international peace organizations, all sorts of things like that as an individual. So anyway, since this time, it's rare that U.S. and British policy, foreign policy, have not been linked. And they drug us into the Middle East squabbles, because after that, once their military capabilities, Britain's, started to wane for two reasons. One, the English were getting tired of these foreign adventurisms that they were involved in for 2 centuries, really. But particularly after World War II, they didn't like it anymore. And then their economy was such that they could not support a large army as they had in the past. And so as a result, our army started to come in and started to take care of a lot of these British initiatives, because we were linked in these foreign policies through this network. And once this occurred, what happened was that the hatred towards the British in the Islamic countries switched to becoming a hatred of American foreign policy and thus Americans. And this started to launch the terrorism against Americans and the United States. Now, this is strictly an outline. There are a lot of nuances, as I said at the beginning, that are involved. But no means are we under the sway of the English today. It's the other way around. But they got us involved in this to begin with. And they did it through this front called the Council on Foreign Relations, which is today the predominant a member of the Royal Institute's network. The thing is that when it comes to terrorism in the region and that sort of thing, to further answer the question that was written to me, I simply suggest that you get a hold of my DVD on exposing terrorism and the booklet Exposing Terrorism. This will tell you more about what's going on in the world of terrorism than anything else. It is still run by states, it's still run by governments, and so on. Relative to the Council on Foreign Relations, we have a reprint called the Council on Foreign Relations and Shadows of Power. Now, this book here will tell you more about what's been going on with the Council on Foreign Relations, and it also has a membership list so that you can look at it when you're watching television to see whether or not the individuals that CNN or Fox or anybody else has on are actually members of the Council on Foreign Relations. And believe me, all the channels and commentators, not all the commentators, but most of the commentators in these big TV stations are members of the Council on Foreign Relations. It's just the way it is. And they all advocate a one world government. We're not talking about people that are just superficially in and then out. We're talking about people that have been members for decades in certain instances. And then two, if you want to understand better the treaty process of how that's destroying the United States and taking over our foreign policy as well as our internal policies and changing society even inside the United States, is my book called International Merger by Foreign Entanglements. It's an easy read. And so I would go online. You're already with us. Just switch over to Shop JBS and look these things up. That will answer more questions than the brief amount of time that I have to try and explain to you how we got involved and how we continue to be involved and the end product that will be there when it's all done. Until next week, We'll see you then.